A. Karen tried to suppress the votes of those she deemed too brown to be American. But little did she know that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Here's what I did. So, there I was, just minding my own business at the local community center, where early voting for the upcoming election was taking place. I'm a 21-year-old college student of Indian ethnicity, and I've got this chill, laid-back vibe going on. With my long, wavy hair, oversized hoodie, and ripped jeans, I don't think I stood out too much in the crowd. But little did I know that my casual attire and seemingly inconspicuous appearance would soon become the center of attention in the most bizarre encounter with a Karen. As I made my way into the community center, I couldn't help but notice the unusually high number of people around. There were some election volunteers and various campaign posters scattered throughout the area. It seemed like everyone was excited to cast their vote and have their voices heard in the election. While I was waiting in line, I couldn't help but overhear a commotion happening nearby. It looked like a middle-aged woman, who I'd later come to know as Karen, was confronting a young Latina woman. Karen was sporting the classic, "Can I speak to your manager" haircut, oversized sunglasses, and a holier-than-thou attitude. She was claiming to be a volunteer for a local voting rights organization and was checking IDs to ensure that people were eligible to vote in the upcoming election. As I got closer, I couldn't help but eavesdrop on their conversation. The Latina woman looked pretty uncomfortable, but she was standing her ground. "You know, I'm just making sure that everyone here is actually allowed to vote. So can I see your ID, please?" The Latino woman replied, "I already showed my ID to the official inside. I don't see why I have to show it to you, too." Karen aggressively mutters, "Well, honey, it's my duty as a concerned citizen to make sure everyone is following the rules. Now show me your ID or I'll have to report you." The Latina woman reluctantly showed her ID, and Karen scrutinized it with an air of superiority. Finally satisfied, Karen let her go, and I thought that would be the end of it. But I was wrong. As I continued to wait in line, I noticed that Karen was only targeting people who looked too brown for her liking, trying to deter them from voting. It was becoming increasingly clear that her true motivation was racism and voter suppression. Feeling disgusted by her behavior, I decided to ignore her and focus on the task at hand. But as fate would have it, Karen decided to make her way towards me. "Excuse me, young man, can I see your ID, please?" So I say, why do you need to see my ID? I'm just here to vote like everyone else." "Well, you see, I'm volunteering for a local voting rights organization, and I'm just making sure that everyone is eligible to vote. You know how it is, right?" I rolled my eyes and sighed. "Look, I'll show my ID to the official inside when it's my turn to vote. I don't see any reason to show it to you." "Well, you just look too brown to be an American. I need to make sure you're not trying to commit voter fraud." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My ethnicity has nothing to do with my eligibility to vote. "Well, if that's true, then you shouldn't have any problem showing me your ID." I hesitated for a moment, thinking about how best to handle the situation. My first instinct was to tell Karen off, but I knew that would just fuel her entitlement. So I decided to call her bluff. "All right, if you're really a volunteer for a voting rights organization, then show me your credentials. If you can prove that you have the authority to check my ID, then I'll gladly show it to you." Karen's face turned beet red, and she fumbled in her purse for a moment before producing a worn-out business card that looked like it had seen better days. "Here, see, this is my proof. Now, show me your ID." I took a quick glance at the card and couldn't help but chuckle. It was clear that she had just scribbled the name of the so-called organization on the back of some random business card. "Nice try, but this doesn't prove anything. I'm not showing you my ID." She then shouts, "How dare you? I'm just trying to protect the integrity of our elections, and you're treating me like a criminal. If you don't show me your ID, I'm going to report you to the authorities and get you deported, you import." At this point, the commotion had attracted the attention of an actual election volunteer who came over to see what was going on. "Is everything all right over here?" Karen screams. "No, it's not! This young man is refusing to show me his ID, and I believe he's trying to commit voter fraud." The election volunteer looked puzzled but decided to address the situation. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but it's not your responsibility to check people's IDs. That's our job. If there's an issue, we'll handle it." Karen defensively retorts, "Well, I'm volunteering for a voting rights organization, and it's my duty to make sure everyone is eligible to vote." The election volunteer didn't seem convinced, but they decided to play along. "If that's the case, can you please show me your credentials?" Karen hesitated, clearly caught off guard. She reluctantly handed over the same business card she had shown me earlier. The election volunteer examined it and then shook their head. "I'm sorry, but this doesn't give you the authority to check people's IDs. I'm going to have to ask you to stop bothering the other voters and let us do our job." Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red, and she started to protest. "This is outrageous. I'm just trying to help. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but please step aside, ma'am, or else I'll call security." Defeated, Karen huffed and stormed out of the community center, muttering something about ungrateful people, and the downfall of this country. Karen had been put in her place, and everyone she had harassed was now free to exercise their right to vote without her racist, entitled interference. And that, my friends, is the story of how I stood up to a racist, entitled Karen who thought she could suppress the votes of those she deemed too brown to be American. Wow, OP, I can't believe you had to go through all that. What a crazy and entitled Karen. I mean, who does she think she is? Checking people's IDs based on their skin color? That's just ridiculous. But I gotta give you props, OP, for handling the situation so calmly and cleverly. I mean, calling out her bluff and making her show her credentials was genius. And then to have an actual election volunteer come over and put her in her place? That's just priceless. Entitled, Mother Lets Her Own Mother Die for Money. Yeah, this story is a bit grim. For a bit of context, my great-grandmother had 9 kids, 4 girls and 5 boys. When her sons were old enough, they left the town to pursue the American dream, leaving my great-grandmother with her daughters. My grandmother is the older of all the sisters, and entitled aunt is the youngest of them, which left room for entitled aunt to take over my great-grandmother's house. Fast forward to the 80s. All my grandmother's brothers, except entitled aunt and great-grandmother, managed to get their U.S. citizenship, which meant they could work there without the fear of being deported. So they started to send money to great-grandmother so she could stop working and remodel her home so she finally had a better life. As time went by, my great-grandmother began to be a victim of the age. She could no longer fend for herself, so entitled aunt began to take care of her. And because of that, her brother's money began to go towards her. In 1996, entitled aunt had her first daughter, and the following year she got married, then took her husband to live at her mother's house. Everyone knew that she had paid for the wedding with the money they had sent her to take care of her mother. But every one of her brothers let it pass since no one wanted to return from California to Mexico just for a little money. My grandma had been non-stop visiting great-grandmother every week since she found out about her weakness. So every Sunday she took me to see her, feed her, and talk with her in the 2000. Entitled aunt started to give grandma a list of groceries to buy for their mother. Entitled aunt said that all the groceries were for making food for her mother for all the week. It was weird because entitled aunt was getting money from her brothers in U.S., but she let it slide because grandma didn't have time to take care of great-grandmother. So she started to bring groceries every 2 weeks. After a few months, Grandma arrived by surprise on Tuesday to prepare the food herself. That same day, she did not only discover that entitled aunt and her daughters have been eating the food for great-grandmother, but that aunt had great-grandmother eating only rice and water for more than 3 months. They only fed her with true food when Grandma went to visit them. Grandma was furious, but she didn't want to say anything to her brothers because she didn't want the family to fragment more than it already was. In addition, entitled aunt threatened Grandma with telling his brothers that Grandma wanted to kidnap great-grandmother so that the money went to her and left entitled aunt with nothing. Due to the threat, entitled aunt began to restrict visits to Grandma. She started to visit them once every 2 weeks, then every 3 weeks, then a month. Even so, Grandma would bath her mother and make her some food. Then some years passed in which Grandma barely saw her mother, until in 2013 she went to visit her mother in May. Entitled aunt had not let Grandma see her mother for more than half a year. When she was allowed, she found that great-grandma had a ball in her head, above her left eye, was very skinny and almost reaching the bone, and could hardly speak. Great-grandma was glad to see her daughter, after half a year of not seeing her. As soon as Grandma asked her what had happened with her mother, she said that they were things of the age, but Grandma did not believe anything. Because 6 months ago, great-grandma was not as emaciated as it was at that time. Grandma took her mother out of her wheelchair to take her to the doctor, to which entitled aunt refused, said that their mother was fine. Grandma tried to take her by force, but entitled aunt fought not to let her go, so she had to give up to prevent hurting her mother. 4 months passed until Grandma managed to take a doctor to visit her mother's house. The doctor was in shock seeing the state great-grandmother was in, so he called an ambulance and they took her to the hospital, not without entitled aunt making a fuss while they were taking great-grandmother away from her. The doctor told Grandma that her mother was starving and very dirty, that it looked like she had not bathed it in more than a year, in addition to the fact that the ball on her head was a kind of fungus due to lack of hygiene. It was so ingrained in her skin that it had reached the bone, and there was nothing that could be done. They added that great-grandma easily could have reached 100 years old since she was completely healthy outside the fungus and her weakness. Grandma was angry and sad at the news. In disbelief that entitled aunt was so negligent with her own mother, she didn't know what entitled aunt had done with all her brother's money. At the beginning of October, entitled aunt's second daughter had her birthday in which grandmother wasn't invited to. Entitled aunt told her sisters that she had not been eating at home since 2001, that they always went out to eat at restaurants, that her her husband hasn't worked since 1996, she was sending all her daughters to private schools, and that she bought everything they wanted for their daughters. Then, if she didn't have the money for it, she just cried to her brothers in the United States to send her more money. She had the audacity to ask $1,000 from each of her 5 brothers to make the birthday party. It was obvious that entitled aunt was giving herself a good life at the expense of her brothers and her mother, so she didn't want Grandma to take her mother, because great-grandma was her bank. Sadly, entitled aunt did not let Grandma take her mother to her house, so Grandma began to visit her every day. Without fail, she knew that her days were counted, and she felt that it was her fault, that if she had faced entitled aunt to give her over, great-grandma would have lived 10 years more. My great-grandma passed away on January 7, 2014 at the age of 89. But that didn't stop my entitled aunt's madness. She continued begging her brothers that she didn't have money because here in town there is no work. At that moment, Grandma broke all connection with entitled aunt, called all her brothers, and told them how horrible she had been with her mother, how entitled aunt had let their mother die for money, how she wanted everything to herself. Entitled aunt went to face Grandma since all her brothers had turned off the money tap. Grandma shut the door in her face. Last year, some of the brothers decided to return to town after being 40 years out. Grandma organized a barbecue for everyone in her house. Everything was quiet until entitled aunt and her 3 daughters appeared. Apparently someone had told her about the barbecue and that some of her brothers came to visit Grandma, so she decided to invite herself to the reunion without even bringing something to cooperate. But Grandma let her pass. She thought her sister had already learned her lesson. Not even 5 minutes passed, and entitled aunt was already crying to one of her brothers that she was struggling with money, that she had debts, and that she needed $1,500 to pay them. One of her brother put on a serious face and said, "I'll see what I can do." After half an hour, entitled aunt had already asked everyone for money and had already eaten, so she excused herself and left with her daughters. Grandma asked her brother what he would do about entitled aunt's money petition, and he said, "I saw a help wand in the market. I'm going to send her the direction for the job." Then everybody laughed. Last week, Grandma made another barbecue since her brothers came back to visit her. We chose one of my aunt's places, my dad's sister, so that she would not find us. Who would say that entitled aunt would be so determined? She reappeared in the reunion, came to present with everyone as if nothing had happened. Everybody was waiting for her act to start and ask us for money, which she did, and we all started laughing in her face. She fell silent and went to a corner to eat. Then she just did the same thing as last time, excused herself and left. We thought it would be the last time we would see her do that, but no. A couple of days ago, my grandma told me that entitled aunt began calling each of her brothers individually to ask for money. Each one hung up as soon as the word money was mentioned. I don't understand where entitled aunt gets so much evil from, how someone can let their mother die in that inhumane way, but I'm sure there's a place reserved for her in hell. I don't know how someone could possibly be so ignorant towards their own mother's health. Your aunt sounds like a jerk, and I'm glad the whole family know this now. I just wish everyone would have noticed sooner, instead of always letting it slide to avoid confrontation. My heart goes out to your mom as well. She must have been so unhappy with herself for not noticing what was going on sooner, but really, there was no way to notice. Who would expect their own sister to not look after their mother properly? Even after your great-grandmother's passing, it does not seem like much has changed with your aunt, as she still seems to only care for herself. Therefore, it might be best to just cut ties with her until you guys really see an effort from her to change. An entitled Karen claims I'm faking my blindness and lets her kid steal my walking cane, the stick I need to use to walk around. So a bit of backstory, I'm a 28-year-old woman who just recently went fully blind. When I was a teenager, I volunteered with my local youth group to help rebuild Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina. And while down there, I picked up a fungal parasite called histoplasmosis that over a decade migrated to my eyes and slowly caused blindness. I've been totally blind for about a year now, so I'm pretty new to it, but I digress. When I first went blind, I barely left the house and was afraid to go in public. I felt like everyone was staring at me, and in all honesty, I barely knew what I was doing. The transition had been difficult, and I didn't have any support group to teach me. One day, my husband asks if I can take an Uber down to the bank and deposit a rent check, and I reluctantly agree. While out, he messages again and reminds me that we're out of a few crucial groceries. There was a Walmart grocery literally across the street from the bank, so I figure everything in life is an experience, and I'll have to learn how to shop alone eventually. So why not? Everything was fine at first, and I was only grabbing a few things so I didn't need a cart. I was using my cane and what little echolocation skills I had at the time to get around, but was still bumping into things as we blind tend to do sometimes. My cane suddenly hit something a bit softer, and I figure maybe I had whacked someone's leg and apologize. Cue entitled kid and entitled Karen mother. I accidentally bumped my cane into someone while I was walking. I said, "Shoot, I'm sorry." Karen goes like, "Hey, you just hit my son." So I apologized saying, "I'm so sorry, ma'am, I didn't see him there." Karen begins yelling, "How could you not see him? He's clearly right here." Now I'm fully blind, but I don't wear sunglasses. Mostly because I can't afford a good UV blocking pair, but also I'm not ever looking for pity or to play the part of a generic blind person. I just want to be treated like a normal person, but I do understand her confusion as blindness is a spectrum, so I try to calmly explain. "Ma'am, I'm blind. I can't see anything, let alone your son. That's why I have to use the cane, so I can get around without..." She cuts me off. "If you're blind, why aren't you wearing big sunglasses?" Now, as a blind person, I get a lot of stupid questions, but I understand a lot of them are just people who don't know better, so I try to happily answer as many as I can. Those big sunglasses are really expensive, around $200 for a good pair, and I really don't need any inside. Then Karen has the audacity to say, "You're not blind, you're faking it. Here is where my blood starts to boil." I can't think of any reason someone would want to pretend to be blind. It's an actual hell, and nothing pisses me off more than when someone calls me a liar when I'm not. Just as I'm about to respond, I feel a tug, and before I blink, I realize this little demon spawn has snatched my $100 cane from my hands. For those of you who don't understand, that's like if you're shopping, and suddenly the power goes out and you can't see a single light. Without my cane, I can barely move at all without crashing into anything. My voice gets shaky as I begin to panic. "Please give that back. I really do need it." "No, you don't. You liar. My son deserves to play with this more than you." I hear her shuffle away and my expensive cane cracking into metal displays and such as they leave. I start crying and waving my arms in front of me to grab onto something, anything, and end up crashing and falling into a center aisle display, making a loud scene. Without fail, I somewhat curl into a ball and cry. I'm alone in public, in the dark, and I had no idea what to do. Suddenly, I feel a hand on my shoulder, and a man's voice, we'll call him AG for awesome guy, asks if I'm okay and to stay right here. I do, but begin to at least sit up and listen. This man must have been tall and built like a tank because his footsteps sounded like a giant, and I felt a suction of wind when he took off. Maybe about 30 or 40 feet away, I hear this loud bellowing like an angry lion and a loud crash. Then before I know it, the man is back and helping me to my feet. He takes my hand and puts my cane into my palm and helps me pick up the items I dropped when I fell into the display. Me wiping tears from my cheeks. Thank you so much. I didn't know how to handle that. AG tells me not to worry about it and how some people are just monsters. This guy restored my faith in humanity and even helped me finish shopping and helped me out of the store. As we're leaving, I can hear the familiar screeching of Karen, something about AG grabbing the cane and pulling hard, flinging her little devil child into a shopping cart. I don't know if she was exaggerating or not, but it would explain the crash I heard. It's easy to feel alone in a world without sight, but even through the sheer terror of being stripped of my cane, at least I know now that there are people willing to stand up for me when I need it. This woman knowingly and willingly allowed her kid to not only steal from a blind person, but to steal one of the most important things that a blind person could have to still make it around in this world. I guarantee you she even encouraged it. People like that deserve to be publicly shamed in a town square. Thank God for that awesome dude though, for sure. The bystander effect can be really awful sometimes, but as you said, I'm glad there are good people left in this world.